You're about to learn the ways our guest, James Edwards, wins his tax work to the extent that he now realistically has too much. He started his own firm in May 2020 with 0 clients, but is now overflowing with work. If you want to become a tax director or partner for an accounting firm, or you want your own successful tax business at some point, this episode is a must listen. You're listening to episode 112 of the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast that helps UK tax professionals to increase their value and helps them to have the careers they want.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode. We're joined by James Edwards in this episode, who pretty much breaks all the rules for what a stereotypical tax advisor is like. I heard James speak on another podcast about how he was working long hours, 7 days a week for a period, actually, due to having too much tax work and not enough resource to deliver it in the normal working hours. This is not the typical scenario you see when someone starts their own firm, but somehow James had not had the usual struggles with winning clients and work. He had a different problem: delivery. However, this episode is not about delivery or how he's been solving the problem of being too busy. This episode, because James is clearly very good at winning tax clients and winning work, is all about that, so that you can hear where his work comes from, how he wins it, so that you can learn from James and become better at winning tax work yourself. You will inevitably need to be good at this if you want to become a tax director or partner of an accounting firm at some point, or if you want to have your own successful tax business. Rough timings for each section of this episode can be found in the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP112, or by heading on over to the details section of this episode within your podcast player of choice. Another essential skill for tax professionals is tax research skills. This includes being able to find relevant information, use tax legislation, and use tax guidance to find the answer to tax questions. My Tax Research Masterclass is designed to give those in your tax team the practical skills to undertake quality tax research, which will allow you to delegate research tasks, improve the team's billing potential, provide better client service, and improve risk management with client services. The return on investment should be at least 700% in the first 12 months after the course, or, another way of looking at it, an additional £6,525 worth of billing. This is just one of the ways I can add value to your tax teams. If you're interested in learning more, then please do get in touch. You can send me an email to jack@thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com, or you can message me, Jack Bonehill, on LinkedIn. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. All right then, James, if you don't mind can you just start off by telling us a little bit about you and your tax career?
Okay. My name is James Edwards. I work in a firm that's dealt myself with a business partner called Anderson Edwards. I specifically do private client, which is the law term, but personal tax and IHT trusts is, in terms of my career, I started off at a fairly big firm down south, actually in Swindon, nothing but farms. So I did quite a lot of rural work. Moved back up to Edinburgh fairly early into my career, worked at various smaller firms until eventually I went out by myself about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And yeah, we're still quite a small firm. There's 3 of us now, all quite qualified and technical, and we don't have any trainees. Hopefully that's something for next year. But yeah, basically I am quite vocal in the tax world, particularly on LinkedIn and stuff. So yeah, that's me.
So obviously when people start their own firm or business like you have, let's face it, the most difficult thing or the biggest worry is where's the work going to come from? But it sounds like, at least now anyway, that really isn't the challenge for you at the minute, because in fact you've probably got too much work from the conversation we had previously. So like, what are your beliefs around winning work and how to do this well? Because clearly it's working, right?
Yeah, certainly that is the case, and you're spot on with the idea of the worry in the beginning. Like I was, when I first went out by myself, it was sort of COVID times, and I didn't take any clients with me or anything from previous firms, so I really was starting from nothing. I've done the sort of running around in the mud, trying to get sort of easy work in the beginning when you don't really have much of a reputation and things like that. And we're certainly further away from that now. Getting work certainly hasn't been a problem over the past few years. Depending on the type of work you're looking at, like I sort of mentioned that I do a lot of rural stuff, or I used to do a lot of rural stuff. very difficult to get that sort of work because farmers in particular are fiercely loyal. So that's a bit more of a slow burn. But yeah, in terms of how to my sort of beliefs on winning work, my thing is it's just pure transparency. Like I acknowledge the negatives. I bring them up myself in terms of like, for me, that would be, I'm a small personal tax team. Like it's just me on the personal tax team. So if anything should happen to me, there's a problem. And I completely acknowledge that. There are advantages too in the fact that you are dealing directly with me. You're not getting pushed down the chain. And some people really value that. You tend to pick up people who want to work with you when you're so transparent about the whole situation, which leads to longer relationships and better advice, actually, because you tend to know the people and like the people. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing, is the transparency aspect, is you be yourself. It's almost sounds like dating advice, but yeah, it's pretty much just try and be as authentic as you can, and you'll end up getting the stuff that's right for you. That's how I see it.
Yeah. And I don't really like the approach, to be fair. It's exactly how I like to act as well. I just feel like the transparency builds trust, and, then you can weed out the people that are actually going to, I suppose, benefit and get value from working with you, as opposed to the ones that wouldn't. Because obviously, if you essentially give them a dodgy sell and they come on board as a client and then realize that you're operating in a way that can't work for them, you're just going to end up in a bad position for both. You're going to feel stressed. They're going to be annoyed. You're going to have a difficult client to deal with then, and that takes your time away from, other things, doesn't it?
Certainly, it ends up being a lot harder. You run out of work. You run out of time to do other work that would be more valuable. It just doesn't work very well. But to be pragmatic though, in the beginning, I could say this now because I'm sort of 4 or 5 years into it. But in the beginning, you can't be like you can't, if you've got a mortgage to pay, you've got bills to pay, you've got staff to pay. You can't be so picky in the beginning. Like you have the time, so you maybe take on stuff in the beginning that isn't ideal for you, and it's about acknowledging that and then trying to fix that and slowly sort of maybe pass those clients that aren't ideal for you. You pass them to someone else who would be a better fit for. So yeah, I as much as it sounds all lovey-dovey now that everything sort of works, but historically I just don't think it's not fair to simply say, oh yes, just do this, because if you're someone who's starting out from nothing, you do have to do stuff that isn't ideal for you just to keep the lights on. So yeah, it's about working towards the goal of where I am now. But yeah, it took me a few years. So, but yeah, definitely it's the way to go if you can.
Yeah. So it sounds very much then like that you believe there then is that you do need to take on more than what you would ideally want initially, or work that you wouldn't ideally like to do, just because, you need some work. But I suppose looking back now then, do you feel like you maybe took on too much of that initially? Because I know you were working essentially 7 days a week for quite a sustained period, weren't you?
Yeah. It wasn't so much the amount of work. It was probably like, because in personal tax, it tends to be, certainly on the compliance side, it tends to be sort of high volumes of numbers of maybe lower value work. And if you're trying to build relationships over decades, then it's a lot harder to pick up people and get to know them really quickly. So it's not necessarily the number of clients, it's how quickly you take them on and getting to know them and getting to know like what their family situation is, like what are their issues, what are their pain points. It's the number of people and the speed at which you're taking these on that causes the issue. So like, having 200 clients that you individually know is not a huge problem, but taking on 100 of those in a single year is a huge problem. And that was maybe the issue I was dealing with. It was too much too soon, which in order to deal with that properly. Also, stuff going on in my own family life, having 2 young children and stuff. Like it takes a huge toll on you. Don't get me wrong, it's all worked out fine. It's just maybe it couldn't have continued at that level for too long. So yeah, it's probably, like I say, it's probably more the speed that's the issue rather than the number is probably what I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, and I suppose that makes sense, right? Because I suppose if you go into a room and there's 100 people you don't know, you're never going to be able to remember those 100 names, are you, in that kind of meeting or whatever. Whereas if you've met one of them every day over 100 days, you're much more likely to remember more of their names, right? I suppose that's the issue you had, but because you would have had 100 clients that had so much information about them, not just their name, that's an awful lot to kind of almost internalize, isn't it, in a short period of time. So that does make sense, to be fair, that the volume over the period is the problem, not the volume overall.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So if I slow down the work and be a bit more picky, then it should be a bit more sustainable, because I'm not going to say one in, one out, but there might be an element of that. It's like, well, okay, actually now I've got to a point where there's the income's a bit more sustainable. I can pay myself a proper salary. I don't need to take on so much. So actually, okay, this person I no longer need to deal with. I've fixed the problem, so they've left. Okay, I can take on someone else now. That's a bit easier. But when you're trying to build the thing up and just taking on so much, the quality will go down. And like I say, in terms of the transparency, that's what I tell people. I say, hey, I want to do this over a long period of time. I'm going through some growing pains right now. So let's acknowledge the fact that I'll fix the earlier issue and we'll get it sorted. But actually, you might need to be a little bit patient with me while I'm sort of going through these pains. I think people really appreciate that. They like it sort of builds trust, and I'm just very honest about how things will work in the beginning and how I envisage them, how the relationship should look like, what it should look like in the future. So yeah, that's another point. If you do know that things are going to be a bit tough, tell people, like tell the clients that, because it's worked well for me. They just sort of, I think they really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I've had this similar experiences with that. And I think it probably also comes across as a breath of fresh air, because the main majority of professionals won't be that transparent up front, will they? They just won't be. They'll be worried about turning the client off when they want the work or something like that, and they'll be driven by that.
Exactly. Again, would I be so brazen to do that in the earlier days when I needed the work? Probably not, but I can do it now because not everything I absolutely need to take on. So it's a position of luxury now to be more honest about it. But I probably, looking back, it probably would have worked a bit better if I'd been a bit more honest at the beginning as well. So yeah, it's advice I'd give other people, but it's, again, maybe it's not the most pragmatic thing for some people. You're just not going to be able to. At a big firm, you're not going to be able to say, "Oh, I've got too much work on just now. It's going to be lower quality, but it should get better." I can't imagine that at a big firm you'd get away with that. So yeah, it's maybe not fair to say that this is the way to do it, but it certainly worked for me.
Yeah. I think there's a bit of a shift anyway. I feel like that more transparent approach is becoming more acceptable in some bigger organizations anyway. I think a lot of them are still probably stuck more in the traditional approach, which has worked for them for a long time. But I think there is a shift in.
Well, that's good to hear. Obviously, I've not been in a big firm for a long time. Certainly not since after COVID. I imagine that probably did change a lot of cultures and things. But no, it's good to hear. Obviously, you're in a big firm, so you'll know more than me. But no, that's really. I like the idea of that, so that's good.
Yeah. I've had to do it recently because basically my team's gone from 5 people to 3 people in a very short space of time. And the 2 people that have gone, one was a director, one was a manager, massive help when delivering work and a massive loss of resource with them gone. And I've had to do something very similar to you, like, being upfront and be like, well, we can help you, but it's not going to be until say November that we can start helping you. And, even then it's probably going to take us a month because of the amount of work that we've got. So trying to give them realistic timescales up front. And, I've had no problems internally with taking that approach. In fact, it's been encouraged. Which
excellent. No, that's really good to hear. Maybe it's time for me to go back into a big firm now. Anyway.
Maybe. So then, obviously, you've got your beliefs, which have clearly helped you to get to the point you have with winning so much work. But like, how else then do you think you've gotten there? Then, like, because you've obviously won so much that you've become essentially too busy, at least at some points. How have you got to the point of winning so much work?
Well, I did a bit of research into like where the clients are coming from, and I can maybe break it down into like 3 different categories, and they're pretty much evenly spaced out. It's basically a third, a third, a third. So if you take things like the website and things like that, so like basic advertising or like presence, that's probably about a third of the stuff, just like website inquiries or just random phone calls. Another third of it comes from client referrals. So just doing a decent job and then someone says, oh yeah, go and speak to Jamie. He sorts my stuff out. And then the other third, and this is the third that I sort of focus the most on because I feel it's the thing I can work the most on. It's recommendations coming from other professionals. So that would be solicitors, financial advisors, accountants that don't have dedicated tax teams, maybe property professionals. So that's the third that I really focus the most on. And like, there's different ways of doing that, but that's putting so much effort into knowing where the work's coming from, you can sort of focus more onto that, and then sort of really drill down into like how it's coming, like what are the steps that I take in order to create that. Whereas like the website and stuff, yeah, you could invest money in making your website better, creating ways for specific people to reach out to you and things like that. I certainly wouldn't say that that's not worth looking at. But for me, I like the work that's sort of been pre-qualified by another professional that I trust. So, and it tends to be more interesting stuff for me. So I focus on that an awful lot. And like I say, lots of different ways of doing that. And I sort of do multiple different things in order to get more of it. So, but yeah, that's probably where I would suggest people start first. If like people are maybe thinking about doing more learning how to win work, I would suggest sort of getting in contact with related professions and trying to solve their problems. It's basically the easiest way to start off, I imagine.
Yeah. Well, I suppose what's so good about that kind of angle is by building a strong relationship with one person or a few people, you get access to a lot of potential clients, don't you, through it?
Yeah.
So it like spider webs and like opens up very quickly. Whereas if you always go and try and go straight to the clients, which in your case is an individual, it's going to be much more difficult for you to get in front of those people in such a way that they're going to contact you or you get that opportunity to speak to them. Whereas obviously your way, it's warm as well by the time they come over to you. So they're probably more likely to accept than someone that's come through a different source. So yeah, I can see why that one would pay off the most. I think, to be fair, because you're a smaller firm, I think you can probably get away with that more than maybe some bigger firms in some aspects. Because I think if you go to say small accountancy firms that don't have the personal tax expertise that you do, and you can latch onto that very easily, and there's not really going to be any worry that you're going to steal their clients in inverted commas.
But that's a real issue. Like when I was by myself before Dean joined, I got way more work from other accountancy firms because they knew that I couldn't do a set of accounts. So they were like, right, okay, that's fine. Now, when Dean joined, then a lot of people sort of maybe were a bit more standoffish because they were worried that if I do too good a job, maybe the accountancy work will disappear too. No, I don't think we would ever do that. That's just not how we would operate. But I understand the trepidation. So yeah, like I say, I do a lot of stuff with solicitors. So I would focus more on speaking to smaller solicitors because a big sort of top 10 firm are going to have personal tax people to deal with, like the deceased estates and the administration period, which is a lot of the work I do. Whereas like a small solicitor firm, they probably don't want to do the tax. They probably don't want to do the capital gains tax. They don't want to do the reporting of the administration periods. They certainly want to have the software for it. Like they won't want to do the trust tax returns. So I basically try and solve that problem for them and be upfront and realistic about fees, timescales. Like for solicitors, I think you have to acknowledge their pain points. Basically, they want to put the file down. They want for their file, accountant has looked at this, accountant has signed it off. That's what they're looking for. So you tell them how quickly you can do it. If that you're a safe pair of hands for their client, you know how much it's going to cost. And yeah, if you can solve problems and make the pain go away, you're going to get the work once you've proven yourself a little bit. So yeah, it's definitely a really good way of starting to get work rather than sort of go out to a networking event and try and win a client. I obviously that's something that's going to have to happen at whatever stage of career you get to, really towards the end. But yeah, if you're just looking out, it's definitely the baby steps way of doing it. Go and speak to the solicitors, go and speak to the financial advisors. On the personal tax side, I'm not entirely sure how the corporate tax side would go about it, but personal tax, that's how what I did. And
I think it's definitely different. I think in terms of who you want to have as referrers, because it's different people will, I suppose, have access to the right clients for corporation tax compared to personal tax and compared to employment tax. Like I think it's much more difficult actually to get intermediaries or referrers. For my line of work, I think similar to you, my idea, which I haven't put into fruition yet, is to go to some of the smaller accounting firms that have tax teams but don't have specialist employment tax teams. And just have to have some form of agreement with them that says, I'll only do the employment tax work, we won't steal your clients, and kind of deal with it on that basis. I've had one scenario actually where I have had a referral, and the relationship was quite strained with the referrer, between the client and the referrer when it came over to me. And I can just foresee a situation where they might go, well, could we just use you for everything? and that's got to leave me in a really tricky situation because it won't have been pushed by me but it'll be driven by the client instead. So then what do you do in that scenario? Because you could upset your referrer, well, you will upset the referrer surely, but if that's what the client wants, it's what the client wants. And I suppose that's the difficulty that you, I suppose, had when you brought Dean on board, in that that's what people were worried about.
Yeah, and it's happened. It has happened like exactly the way you described it. It's like that we've had a few people who I'm quite close with, accountancy firms, and people say, well, we'd quite like to use you. And I would do everything in my powers to say, well, actually, I think you should stay where you are. I mean, without putting your own service down and without disparaging the other person, it's like, well, I'd much rather you stayed where you were because we can do the work and we'll charge this amount, or it could be higher, it could be lower. I don't really know, but it's more the fact that I don't want to ruin that relationship. Like, it's like one client is probably not worth it. So yeah, it's a really tricky situation. It's one that I hope I don't have to deal with too often, but it's, I certainly don't want to upset any of my sort of pipelines of work. So, it's a real problem. It's a real problem.
Yeah. I did like I said, actually, how you obviously almost, I know you said the work's coming from roughly a third from each of the areas that you mentioned, but that you really focus more on the recommendations, the referrals from other professionals. Because I think what a lot of people do wrongly is they try and do too many things to win work. So they might have 10 different ideas or something, and then they're trying to do all of them at the same time, and obviously splitting their efforts 1/10 rather than, in your case a third. I'm presuming the website kind of angle is now it's set up, but there's not really much to do there, maybe just articles here and there as and when there's something to write about.
Yeah.
Well, how would you then, I suppose, spend your time in each of those areas now then, so that I suppose you don't spread it too thin and you do still focus mostly on, say, the area that you think is the best?
Well, this is a really good point. So I basically said it's a third, a third, a third. However, that's just number of clients. Obviously, a simple landlord tax return is very different from a large construction firm accounts job. So I've actually not done the work in terms of fee value to sort of like value of client fee wise, and to like basically which avenue did it come from. It's maybe a job I need to get a trainee in and like get them to sit and hash the numbers out and do a data analysis on that. In terms, like, so we just hired a senior VAT specialist, and he's sitting twiddling his thumbs with the tax work just now. So right now we're trying to get that work for him to do. So it's almost like it's a specialist new business within the business, So right now we're getting him to write lots of blogs on VAT, and obviously lots of changes going on in that world on private schools and things like that. So we get him to do that sort of thing, just like basically provide information, put it out into the ether, get it onto the website, focus on search engine optimization and things. So when big, and we just sort of believe it will eventually come in. So it's more about adapting to what's going on in the firm. So, but for me, my stuff's fairly steady now. I don't need to focus so much on it. It's particularly this time of year, the personal tax deadlines, and the adverts start to come on the TV and stuff, and it just lodges in people's minds. You get the phone calls. I don't need to focus so much on it. On Dean's side, he's busy enough. He's got enough clients. Some of his clients are doing really, really well, so that's increasing his workload. But like I say, we've got this new person in, so I'm sort of switching to do more sort of BD on his behalf, like rather than for myself. So yeah, it's about sort of allocating your resources and really like be very clear about what you're trying to achieve. I could go to every event under the sun, but if I'm not taking on clients, then what's the point? It's like what am I doing and why am I doing it? And then doing something and recording the results and seeing, well, did that work? Or like what did we get out of that? And experimenting. We do an awful lot of experimenting, and some stuff works well, some stuff doesn't work so well. So yeah, and it's about the stuff that does do well, do more of it. It's as simple as that. I may be making it sound quite simple, but it's about having creative ideas and then sort of following through on them. And yeah, we just have this belief that it will be worth it, even if an individual idea doesn't pan out. We'll move on to the next one.
Yeah. I know it might sound like it's oversimplifying it, but at its core, that is, how you describe it is exactly what it is. And I actually think we're guilty, when it comes to winning work as tax professionals, to overcomplicate it. I think it's way more difficult and way more snazzier than it needs to be, when you just got to boil it down to the basics, really, haven't you, really? Which is, I think, almost like, what's your ideal client and how am I going to get in front of them?
Yeah.
Those really are like the two key questions, really. And obviously, you've got your different ways. You've got your website. That's one way to get in front of them. You've got the client referrals. That's one way to get in front of them. You've got your recommendations from other professionals. That's one way to get in front of them. And you know that those people, and you've set all those things up in a way that you're getting put in front of your ideal clients, I'm presuming. So,
Yeah.
you know, it really, the concept is simple. I think it's the taking the action part to do that is more difficult.
Yes. And I think if you don't get an immediate result, it's hard to justify doing something again. So for us, I don't have so much pressure as you possibly would do in a big firm. So if you spent some time, like let's say you took a morning out of your day, you've lost a morning of work. So you basically got that cost. And then if you're saying that, well, okay, we're going to host an event and it's going to cost this actual money rather than just time. And then all of a sudden, put all the resources into this. You've spent all this money and you got nothing out of it, or at least you perceive you got nothing out of it. Then you're probably going to have pressure from the person that's in charge of the money if you're trying to do something like that again. Whereas it might take you 3 or 4 or 5, maybe 12 attempts at something before something massive comes out of it. I think as a small firm, obviously our cost can stay a bit lower and we've just got less pressure to definitely get a result immediately from something. Like I really have a lot of sympathy for the pressures that come in working at big firms, because like I can do all these wonderful experiments. I can do a podcast. I can do video stuff on LinkedIn. And if nothing happens and if I don't get anything from it, it doesn't matter. I'll move on to the next thing. But if you consistently don't get good results from investing all this time and effort and money into things, then you're less likely to do it again and just sort of curl up and focus on the easy stuff that you've already got. And yeah, it's about taking risks is what I'm trying to say. And it's probably easier for me to take risks than it is for other people. So
yeah. I think the hardest thing is, when it comes to, I suppose, sales, it is looking into the future and being able to see the fruits of the activity that you've undertaken. And obviously you don't know that that's going to happen until it happens in a lot of cases. So I think whenever you're trying something new, or whether it's costing you physical money to do something or not, I think if you can have like a tried and tested method that you've seen work for other people, then that's a good indication that it will work for you, as long as you, I suppose, put enough effort in, enough consistency, it'll come over time. So I kind of had that with the podcast, I suppose. I built the podcast up, I suppose, fairly slowly, really, over time. But I knew that podcasts are a really good way to build trust and relationships with people that you don't actually know. Which sounds ridiculous, but that's a huge part of like any sales process, is getting people to trust, like you, and believe in you, I suppose. So now whenever I have like chats with other tax professionals about any of the courses that I have and things like that, I think it's hard to say for sure, but I feel like it's much easier than what it would have been if I didn't have the podcast and I was just going in straight in with here's my courses and how I can help you tax people, because I've got like that credibility. People know who I am, I suppose. And they already feel like they know me before that first conversation sometimes.
Yeah, and it's about playing to your strengths as well. I mean, I'm private client tax, so just by the nature of what I do, I'm a bit fluffier, and I'm more about like, oh, how does that make you feel, rather than a bit more business-like. That was actually quite interesting, because just last night, actually, I was at an event and it was very much more business-like. I was certainly the only sort of private client element at this event. There were other tax professionals there, but they were more corporate tax and employment tax, because the event was probably more directed towards them. And that was not my comfort zone last night, actually. Everything was a bit more cut and dry, rather than my sort of, oh, how do you feel sort of thing. It's sort of my way of doing things. And so, yeah, some things will not go as planned, but I think just much like doing a podcast or something like that, just put yourself out there and you'll find your people. But yeah, it's not going to go well all the time. I mean, to be fair, the thing I went to last night, like just by being a little bit different, I might have stuck in people's minds or whatever. I might get something out of it, but it's a tough old slog. I'm from a sort of performing background. I was a professional musician for a long time, so I'm fairly used to putting myself out there, and I don't get nervous easily. I don't get anxious easily, whereas like a lot of people will. And I think I think baby steps is the way to do it. Like you will, if you want to get any sort of senior in your career, you can either be incredibly technical and basically you never have to be in front of anybody and you can just be this wonderful technical person. But more likely, you're going to have to win work. You're going to have to get good at stuff that you're maybe not naturally good at. I think, I think it's a really tough career path for a lot of people who don't naturally want to do this. And I think like doing something like a podcast, and you're sort of proving that you can do that. And I think that's a wonderful way of sort of evolving your career. You're not just going to sit and do your technical stuff. You're going to have to speak to people and get better at it. So yeah, that's I'm a big fan of people doing things that are slightly different in the tax profession. So yeah.
Yeah, anything to make us seem less boring than we're perceived.
Well, that's another point actually as well. If you can be a bit self-deprecating when you're sort of speaking to people, I think it disarms people an awful lot. Like when people ask me what I do, I sort of like laugh and say, "Oh, I do the incredible, exciting technical tax world," and people sort of like laugh along sympathetically. And then if you just get really, really passionate about the subject, which a lot of tax people are, like if you get tax people onto the subject of tax, like people can like really talk about it with real passion. And I'm a big believer of anything is interesting if the person is speaking about it passionately. I've always been a believer that no matter what it was I did, like I could be a paint salesman and I would think paint was the most interesting thing in the world. And I think a lot of people in tax are like that. Like we're just a very specific breed of people that just happen to find tax interesting. Yeah. So therefore, they must find everything interesting. So that's how I see it. And we do have this perception of the boring tax professional, but it's just not been my experience of when meeting other tax people. It's just I've met some boring people in my life, but none of them have been tax people. So
no, the problem is that the word tax, people associate that with being boring, don't they? So then they associate the people that work in it as automatically being boring too. But no, I'm sure there are some really boring tax people out there. Like there is in every walk of life. But with you, it's not my experience of the large majority of tax professionals. And let's face it, anyway, the word boring is subjective. Who I might find boring, someone else might find really exciting.
Exactly. No, I completely agree. I completely agree with that.
My Tax Research Masterclass is estimated to give your tax team at least a 700% return in the first 12 months per person in your tax team that you enroll. Another way to look at this is an additional 6.5k of additional billing in the first year. That's the potential return here. If you're interested in finding out more, including where these numbers come from, then get in touch and we can organise a meeting. Jack at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com, or you can message me, Jack Bonehill, on LinkedIn. Both these contact details are in the show notes at taxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP112. Back to the episode. I think because you've said for you, the best place for you to focus on work is those recommendations from other professionals then. Can we just draw down a little bit into that then to I suppose, understand what activity that you actually take? Because obviously you've got to get in front of that person at some point, and I'm assuming then build a relationship with them and then get them to start, giving you referrals. So, how do you do all of that?
That's a really good point. So how do you get the first initial message? Like how do you that's the first thing. So I get invited to a lot of events, just in tax in general, because it's so connected to the accountancy world, the legal world, and the financial advice world. Tax is one of these things that sort of combines them. So I tend to get invited to things because just from my general network, just people I've had beers with, that sort of thing. Say, oh, would you want to come along to this event? So I'll go along and I'll maybe meet somebody else there. I'll speak about, if someone says they're a solicitor, for example, I'll try and show an interest in what area they're doing. So I have to sort of have a bit of knowledge of the industries that I'm speaking to. And I'll ask them questions about what the clients are asking then, and then sort of build a bit of relationship that way. And then eventually you might get an email. So I'll give you an example. I had a smallish law firm reach out to me a few months ago saying that they were disposing of a property within a deceased estate. I think they found me on a website or something. I said, could I do the capital gains tax 60-day reporting? So I was like, yep, absolutely. So I told them how much I would charge for it based on like sort of roughly knowing what the value of the property was. And it shouldn't be too difficult because I've done the process a million times. But I didn't stop there. I didn't just say, oh, I can do this piece of work and I can do this. I then sort of finished the email and I said, right, okay, that's the bit you've actually asked for. And I said, but also I do a lot of this administration period stuff. And I also know that a lot of small solicitors really hate chargeable event gain certificates. So I was like, right, okay, I also do a lot of this stuff. So if you ever see this is what you would do. And this is what I would do if you wanted to use me to do it. And if it was an informal one, this is what I would do, a charge per tax year. And this is roughly, if it was a formal one, you would need to do full returns and we'd do this. So it was like, I've answered your question at the top. And that's the bit you actually wanted to know. But if you're interested, I also do all this other stuff too. And I ended up picking up about, there must have been like 7 trusts off the back of that. We was like over the course of the next month, was like, oh, didn't know that you did that. Yeah, actually, this is a real problem. Could you do this work? So it's more about sort of like going that extra mile and like just knowing their industry, knowing what their issues are, and then sort of going, hey, I can solve that, by the way, and trying not to be too aggressive with it. And yeah, that's been something really wonderful. I mean, I sort of half mentioned that I've sort of got into the sports tax world recently, and I'm terrified of this stuff because it's not really my area. But I knew that the payroll department was a problem. There was a lot of conversations about how terrible the payroll department was. And this is coming from the people getting paid. So your employment tax, you probably know a lot about this world, a bit more than me. I sort of reached out to the payroll department and said, I've got a couple of clients who deal with you. Could I come in and speak to you and find out, like, why are they so upset about various things? And then, yeah, they were quite open to it. And so I went in and spoke to them, picked up a couple more connections that way. So it's really just about finding the opportunities and making the most of them. I mean, people, like, not everything's going to work out, but people are going to knock you back or like not respond and things. But yeah, it's about like, well, just not taking it personally and be like, well, okay, well, I tried. I was genuinely trying to help. But if you do it enough, like eventually you'll get a positive response and you sort of build your reputation, and then eventually people will say yes more often than they'll say no. So that's that's sort of the BD idea. Like slowly trying to like build these individual things and create something and grow something out of what could be quite small, but then actually, you know what, like keep going and keep trying to like work more closely with them, pick up more work from the existing stuff. So yeah, that's sort of how I go about it, and it worked quite well for me.
Yeah. So in that small law firm scenario, then was your message entirely by email? You didn't have a conversation or anything with them initially?
It was initially all email, and then I picked up the phone and spoke to them. There's a couple of offices, so I spoke to one office, and then they spoke to their other offices. Oh, we found a guy who can do this stuff and fairly reasonable fees, and then they spoke to me as well. So yeah, it was all email initially, and then a couple of phone calls, and actually then I met them in person because I was buying my own place up in Dunblane, which is quite close to Stirling if you don't know the Scottish geography. And I said, they were saying, hey, do you do conveyancing? So I'm looking for a solicitor nearby, and so yeah, I ended up being a client of theirs. So it was so it's sort of building that sort of work. So yeah. Quite well.
I think so. It's kind of a philosophy that I want to create in my team, to be fair, and I've tried to think of different ways to explain it. But I think essentially what you're doing there is when you've got that contact with someone, that interaction with someone, essentially what you're trying to do is imagine a sponge. You're trying to squeeze out all the opportunities that exist within that sponge, right, when you have the chance to do it, rather than just say, answer the initial question, leave it at that. You're thinking, well, I've got this opportunity now, I'm in front of them, they're probably going to read this email, so now I can tell them about other things I can do. So I suppose you did the most basic level of, let's just make them aware that I do this. You probably didn't tell them about the benefits of it and all the other great stuff that come with it. You went short and simple so that the email probably wasn't too long, right? Yeah. And I suppose if you then had the chats, or when you had the chats, that's when you could have almost gone to the next level of selling, if you want to call it that, which is they're aware now, and they can tell them about the great benefits of them just doing that work anyway, and also the benefits of you doing it. And I think actually what a lot of where we overcomplicate winning more work, I think, as tax professionals is we always think that if we want a new piece of work, then we need to get it from a client that we've not had before, a new person. Whereas it's really not the case. I don't find, particularly in my area of employment tax anyway, is once you've got your foot in the door with that one client and they start sharing information with you and you start telling them about things that are topical and things that you're seeing with other clients that are risk areas, all of a sudden that one piece of work can turn into like 10 pieces of work, quite easily.
Exactly. Like take your role, for example. So like my thought would be, right, okay, so someone comes to you because they want a PSA, right? So it's a really complex, like sort of piece of work, like annual work, blah, blah, blah. Then all of a sudden you're in front of the client and they're like, yeah, keep losing my senior staff. And you're like, well, you know about enterprise management incentives. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, actually there is a specific thing that like sort of encourages people to stay for at least 3 years. And it's like, well, all of a sudden it's, oh, wow, that's quite interesting. Like, how would I go about doing that? Well, this is something that you would do. So it's about, like I say, it's not just doing work. You have to have an awareness of what their pain points are. Like, what are the issues? And there's probably something tax efficient or encouraged in order to solve that problem. Because, I mean, tax is, a lot of tax policy is about trying to like make people behave a certain way, not just about raising revenue. So it's like, well, actually, yeah, you've got a problem, and actually there's a mechanism in place to sort of solve that problem, and yeah, we can deal with that for you. So don't get me wrong, I do not be setting up any EMI schemes. I will happily deal with someone who is involved in one, but yeah, I'll leave that to you employment tax, human capital taxes people. It's not an area I want to fall into.
In terms of pricing then, so I think I heard you say on a podcast recently that you're not about out there to just like make a load of money basically. So I get the impression that you don't charge like super high fees. Like, how do you kind of first pick the right fee then? Because if you go too low, you've got to become too busy, right? And you're not going to be able to do everything, but go too high and then almost going against your own ethos and you can put people off. So how do you go about that to try and, I suppose, maximize the chance of converting work that is what you actually want?
Well, I've got to bear in mind that Dean is sitting behind me here and he's way more commercial than I am. And I might upset some people by saying this, but basically I view private client, rightly or wrongly, as maybe not the most profitable side of accountancy firms or law firms, actually. I view it as more of, it's a necessary thing if you want to take on bigger work. Like if someone's got a wonderful company and you can charge loads of money to go with the company because they're quite happy paying VAT, because they're VAT registered themselves, and they can see the value in it. Tax, and much like payroll, I think people don't view it as valuable as they maybe view how to grow your business or how to take pain away. So I think people need to be a bit more realistic in pricing in the private client world because people just aren't happy to pay the fees. So I almost use personal tax as a way of generating work for the more profitable sides of the business. This is a very personal thing. I know that a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but in terms of pricing, I am not the cheapest. We're probably about middle of the market in Edinburgh. But equally, I deal with people who earn less than £10,000 a year, and I also deal with people who earn 8 figures a year. So I don't really charge by how much money you have, unlike some areas of the professional services world. And I'm not having a go at any of that. I'm more interested in the problem. Like if someone's got an interesting personal tax problem, like I want to do it. And they could probably tell in my voice that I want to do the work because I'm excited. I think, oh, wow, what a wonderful problem. I've only ever seen that in the textbooks. I definitely am not commercial enough on that. With that being said, to give you an idea, actually, I'm just going to give you some numbers. So like say I've got someone who is earning £200,000 a year employment. It's actually not that complicated. They're in a share option scheme, but everything's being done through payroll because it's a readily convertible asset. I maybe need to worry about the base cost sometimes. So actually, that's quite straightforward work, like to do a personal tax return. But maybe charge £500 plus VAT. Like it's a day, like it's a day's work to like know who the client is and do it properly. And maybe I'll have a conversation in February, March about their pension contributions or something like that. Like, I'm quite happy earning like 500 quid plus VAT for that client, and they might then eventually do something more complex, and I'd fee separately for that. Like there are people who are a lot cheaper than me, and they will happily do that work too. But it's about, again, transparency. Say, I'm quite happy earning that because I don't have the cost associated with like a larger team or anything like that. So I'm quite happy earning this amount. I've got 200 people at that sort of level, a decent amount of money, and do some extra sort of transactional stuff on top of that. I don't want to price myself out of the personal tax market. I like dealing with the complex. And if you just make yourself too expensive, you only deal with a very specific type of client. And that's fine, but it's not for me. I quite like the wide array. But yeah, it's a difficult one. When I was out by myself before Dean joined me, I was way cheaper than that. And honestly, I picked up some absolutely horrendous clients. I'm not going to dance around this. Like, they didn't respect it. They treated me really, really poorly. So it just wasn't fun. And yeah, tax should be fun, right? And yeah, it's about trying to find that balance for you. And that being said, I pick up quite a lot of more straightforward personal tax work from large firms because they can't be as commercial, they can't be as good on price as I can be. And I sort of pass work down to other people if they're really, really straightforward to say, look, right, I'm really sorry, I'm going to charge you like way more than this is worth. Like, you could go to one of the processing firms and I don't think they'd mess this up. Or yeah, I sort of tell people how the market work and like what they could expect to pay at different firms. And like, if someone comes to me with a horrible remittance basis claim, I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that because actually you need to have more junior staff to go through horrible foreign bank accounts, and I'm just going to be too expensive. So like, go to another firm. Yes, they'll charge you more than I would typically charge you, but they're going to do it more efficiently, and it's probably better. So it's about trying to find the right fit for the client when I get the phone calls as well. And when I send some bigger firms some bigger work, they send me some work that's more appropriate for me. It works really well. We're almost like football clubs with feeder clubs and parent clubs. Quite well. So yeah, they obviously I used to work in a big firm, so I know exactly who's right for me and who's not right for me based on size of teams and sort of the level of risk and things like that. So yeah, just knowing the industry well enough and then having those contact of people that you can say, hey, I've just got this problem and it's not right for me. Like, but would you like it? I've sort of warned them how much more expensive you would be in comparison to me. And people sort of, they respond well to that. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So pricing is a difficult one. But like I say, in personal tax, I won't go so far as to call us a loss leader, but I don't think we should be as profitable as the other departments because like, people don't value it as much, and you have to follow the market. That's how I view it. Maybe different in employment tax for you guys because obviously you're dealing with companies, but in private client, like people hate it. Like, they absolutely hate paying personal fees, but they'll happily pay it through the company and won't think anything of it. And I'm the same. Like, I literally I hate paying personal bills, but through the company, I'm pretty, oh yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
It's the same amount of money. It's the same. But yeah, it's a psychological thing, and I just acknowledge it.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I'm trying to increase our fees basically for the work, but I think that's for quite a few reasons though. One, I think we've probably undercharged in the past.
Yeah.
Mainly because of the client base and, what they're willing to pay. But I do truly believe that there's not going to be another employment tax team out there that can do a better job than us. Like, I'm sure there's other ones out there that can do the same job, but if we're right at the top and we can do the same job as the best out there can do, then why should we be significantly cheaper than the others? Now, I agree with you, sometimes it depends what the client is and what they're willing to pay, etc. But what I'm trying to do is, I suppose, help them perceive the value to them as more than maybe what it would have been if I didn't do that. Now I get harder with individuals just doing a personal tax return, because a tax return is a tax return being done by someone competent, or it's being done by someone competent, basically, right? And that's what they're paying for. So I can see how that's more difficult. But yeah, I'm really trying to help people realize the risks, the worries, the opportunities that they can have with employment taxes, so that they're willing to, suppose, pay more. And also the fact that they're going to be working with a team that's going to give them a piece of advice that's really easy for them to digest in comparison to, say, some of the others out there in the market, but is still completely backed by legislation, guidance, case law, as it needs to be, so that it's technically right, technically thorough, but just easy for them to use. So that's what I'm trying to do anyway, a bit to increase prices somewhat. And I also want to move away from the hourly kind of, I estimate it's this based on hourly rates, and then, charge more or less based on that. I actually just want to give fixed fees.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to sell if you go with fixed fee. There's loads of arguments for and against stuff, and I think it really depends on the type of work you're doing. I mean, despite the fact we're a tiny firm, we still do timesheets, and it's nothing to do with like working out like how much I should charge the client. It's for us. It's so that I know like how profitable is this job. Like, do I need to increase the fee? Like, I have to have the way that they provided me the information every year just made it so difficult, and I'm not charging enough. But it's not about like making it, oh, this is taking me 5 hours, so therefore I'm going to charge you 5 hours of work. It's more just like, is this a good job? Is it a bad job? Yeah, I'm a big fan of gathering information on that side of things. So, but yeah, it's a really tough one. It's a really tough one. All I can really say is that because of the nature of the way that me, Dean, and Ian now work, I want to see the firm do better. I don't really see it as my department versus the accounts department, which is probably what happens in larger firms. It's like there's probably a bit of competition. I see it as the firm. And as long as everyone sort of respects each other's department, then the firm should do well. Like, so I try and be as commercial as I can and acknowledge the fact that, yeah, people just don't want to pay personal bills. So if we can make more profit on another piece of work, then actually as a firm, we're doing well. But yeah, it's easy for me to sit and say this right now when we're the size we are. If we get a bit bigger, then maybe things become a bit more tense. Well, but yeah, that's how I view it. I think the point that you said there about you're trying to get people to realize the value, that's easy for us to say, but at the same time, it's like the clients, they don't know the difference between you and another firm, like unless they've specifically experienced it. So it's a very tough job, and yeah, I wish you well. I don't know how you fix that. Like, I don't know how you show value, like comparison to somebody else. I guess you basically have to encourage them to go to another firm and then like come back a year later. Like, I told you I was better.
I think it's very much for me is stories and hopefully some form of written testimonial or something too that kind of backs it up. I think those two things together will help, particularly if that person has experienced more people or the advisor, sorry, so they know, what it could look like. I do think a lot of employers nowadays have experienced employment tax advice from at least one other firm, and they would have known whether it was good or not. I've heard of some right horror stories though, of like even some bigger firms out there literally just sending people HMRC manual pages.
Oh dear, not great.
Great. And that's well, extreme end of bad, clearly, but there's definitely some people that are more in the middle that might not send them the link, but they might say copy out and then add a little bit of extra information or something, but it's still going to be too technical. As you said, there's other people out there that can do the job as well as you, and same for us, but it's hard for people to find it. It's hard to convince them that you're good at it as well. I think really it's just about how you speak to them in those initial interactions and how you come across them. That helps, I would say. So like you, I don't want to come across as a boring tax professional. So I usually try and make people laugh at least once, in that first chat, if I can, or just be really jolly or something, whatever it is, but also demonstrate that I know what I'm talking about at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, that's very key. People have always had a go at me throughout my career for giving away too much information too quickly. But I was like, well, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to prove I know this. I need to prove to this person that I know what I'm talking about. And the only way to do that is by sort of answering the questions. And there's a whole balance of giving away free advice in the beginning, in the sort of initial phone calls, and proving how much you know. It's a really difficult balance. I don't get it right all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, for what it's worth, what I've tried to do is give them information that's more generic but not bespoke to their circumstances.
Yes.
So, it could be this, it could be that, based on these circumstances. They can then go away if they want to and try and come up with the answer based on what you've said, but I don't give them anything bespoke in that initial meeting unless they're paying for it. But the alternative, I basically offer 2 meetings now, or 2 choices of meeting. The first one is you can have a paid for consultation for an hour, and we'll give you like an email summary afterwards of the key points from the advice. Or you can have essentially an introductory call where we can talk about what it is that you need, what it is that you want, and I can tell you how we can help you basically. And then that way, I'm hopefully not giving away much, if any, free information, free tax advice as part of it.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one.
Definitely not one that I cracked. That's my current method of trying it. So I'm sure I'll tweak it and come up with something completely different next week. But
exactly.
As you say, you've got to experiment, haven't you? Sometimes you just got to try something out and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Just in case people want to get in contact with you, James, or learn more about you, where are the best places for them to go?
Oh, well, I'm fairly vocal on LinkedIn. I love a pun. I love a controversial post. Some of them do really, really well. But yeah, LinkedIn's where to find me. James Edwards, ATTCTA is my full name. But yeah, like, do so at your own risk. And I'm very prolific on there. But yeah, like, I'd love to hear from more tax people. Like even if you disagree with anything I say, I'd love to hear from you. So yeah, we all need to stick together in the industry, in my view, that area. So yeah, LinkedIn's the best place to get me.
Thanks to James for joining us on this episode and sharing lots of great information with us. One part that I really liked, and I suggest that you take note of this, is that he doesn't try 100 different ways to win work at any one time. He has 3 different sources of work: his website, referrals from other professionals, and referrals from other clients. And in reality, he's getting most value back from referrals from other professionals. I've seen so many people spread themselves too thin when it comes to trying to win tax work, trying lots of different things all at once. But I encourage you to find one that you expect to be a big hitter and put all your BD efforts into that for a few months and see what you get back. I think you'll be surprised. Show notes for this episode can be accessed at thetaxprofessionals.com/TTPP112. In that link, you can find contact details for James, contact details for me, and also links to my masterclasses for tax professionals. If you don't want to miss future episodes of the podcast, then head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe, where you can sign up for email notifications of all future episodes. Episodes are bi-weekly and then released on Mondays. But that's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed the episode and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop, and improve your tax career. Until next time.